Welcome to our deep dive into privacy. As a philosopher, I'm sure you're already pretty familiar with this concept, but today we're going to really try to, well, go deep.
Yeah, deep dive into privacy. I like it.
Yeah, exactly. And to guide us on this journey, we're using the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy entry on privacy. It's super comprehensive, maybe even a little intimidating, but that's what makes it perfect for a deep dive.
Definitely intimidating. I mean, it covers everything from ancient philosophy to modern day issues like uh, data privacy and surveillance.
Exactly. And we're not going to shy away from any of it. We're going to unpack the history, the definitions, the arguments, the whole shebang.
It's going to be a philosophical workout for sure.
Oh, definitely. So to kick things off, the entry starts by taking us way back to ancient Greece. Aristotle, the polis and the oikos.
Right, right. So Aristotle's distinction isn't about privacy directly, but it kind of lays the groundwork for how Western thought has viewed this whole public versus private thing.
Okay, yeah, I see that. So the polis, the city, that was like the center of public life, politics, community, all that jazz. And the oikos, the household, that was more the private domain, family, personal stuff.
Exactly. So even back then, there was this idea that some parts of life should be shielded from public scrutiny.
Like a sacred space, kind of.
Yeah.
Interesting. So fast forward a few centuries, we get to the liberal thinkers like Locke, Mill, and Rawls. How do they build on this ancient foundation, this polis versus oikos thing?
Oh, for these guys, privacy starts to move away from being just about physical spaces like the home. It becomes more about individual autonomy and rights.
Okay, so less about where you are, more about who you are, what you control.
Exactly. Like Locke, he was big on the idea that individuals have a right to their own thoughts, their beliefs, their property, and that kind of implies a right to privacy in these areas.
It makes sense. If you have a right to your own thoughts, then someone snooping around in your head would be a violation.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And then you have Mill, who is all about individual liberty, freedom to make choices without interference from the state or society. For Mill, privacy was super important for self-development, allowing people to experiment with different identities, beliefs, without fear of, getting punished.
So privacy as a space for freedom, for figuring things out.
Exactly. And then you have Rawls. He approaches privacy from the perspective of justice. He argues that privacy is, well, essential for protecting individuals from unfair discrimination.
Okay, how so?
Well, think about it. If everyone knew everything about you, all your personal info was just out there, it could be used against you, right? In employment, housing, even access to like social services.
Wow, that's a really powerful point.
Mhm.
So privacy isn't just about personal well-being, it's also about fairness, about a just society.
Exactly. And speaking of powerful arguments for privacy, we can't forget Warren and Brandeis and their famous 1890 essay, The Right to Privacy.
Oh yeah, the right to be left alone.
Mhm.
That's like one of the most well-known phrases when we talk about privacy.
For sure. And it's crazy how relevant it still is today.
Mhm.
They were writing in response to the rise of like sensationalist journalism back then, but their arguments about the need to protect individuals from unwanted intrusions into their personal lives, well, it's like they could see the future of data collection and all that.
It's amazing how their work has shaped our understanding of privacy, even in the digital age. And these legal protections they were pushing for, they become even more significant when we look at the specific way privacy is dealt with in the U.S.
Yeah, the U.S. legal system really puts a lot of emphasis on what they call decisional privacy. It's this focus on the right to make personal choices, especially about things like your body and family life.
Right, so this is where we see landmark cases like Roe v. Wade coming in, a decision that was very much rooted in this idea of privacy.
Exactly. So it's not just a philosophical concept. It has real-world implications, legal consequences that impact people's lives.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But of course, not everyone agrees that privacy is like some sacred, untouchable right. And the Stanford entry does a great job of presenting those different perspectives, too. Like we have Judith Jarvis Thompson, who comes in with her reductionist argument, right?
Yeah, Thompson basically throws a wrench in the whole thing. She argues that privacy isn't actually a distinct right at all. It's just a bunch of other rights bundled together.
Okay, so like property rights, bodily security, things like that.
Right. So, for example, if someone steals your diary, she would say that's a violation of your property rights, not your privacy rights.
Interesting. But does that really capture everything we care about when we talk about privacy? It feels like there's more to it than just, physical possessions or safety.
Right. And that's where someone like Thomas Scanlon steps in. He argues that privacy is irreducible, that it's a unique concept with its own moral weight. He says that we have a right to control information about ourselves, to set limits on how we're observed, even if those observations don't directly harm us.
So for Scanlon, even if someone peeked into your diary without stealing it, that would still be a violation because they crossed a boundary you didn't consent to.
Exactly. He's emphasizing that privacy is about, like, conventionally defined limits on access and observation.
Okay, so we have the ancient Greeks drawing a line between public and private, then the liberal thinkers framing privacy as crucial for individual autonomy and justice, and now we have Thompson and Scanlon debating whether privacy is even its own thing. It's like we're building this philosophical framework, layer by layer.
And it gets even more complex as we bring in the economic and social critiques of privacy.
Ooh, that sounds juicy.
So we just left off talking about how not everyone sees eye to eye when it comes to privacy. It's not all, sunshine and roses and everyone agrees it's a fundamental right. There are other perspectives out there that challenge this idea of privacy as some kind of untouchable thing, some kind of fundamental good.
Right, and the Stanford Encyclopedia entry does a really good job of bringing in those alternative views. Like we have Richard Posner, right? He's coming at it from like an economic perspective. And he doesn't exactly seem like the biggest fan of privacy.
No, he's definitely not singing its praises. Posner argues that protecting privacy can actually lead to, like, economic inefficiencies. He's all about utilitarianism, maximizing overall societal benefit. And sometimes, he says, restricting information flow, even if it's personal stuff, can hinder economic progress.
Okay, so for Posner, if sharing your data, let's say your shopping habits or something, helps companies provide better products or services, then maybe a little less privacy is actually a good thing. Like it benefits society as a whole.
Exactly. He's not saying privacy is worthless or anything, but he's making the argument that we shouldn't be protecting it at all costs, especially when it comes to economic considerations. And this raises some really tricky questions about, how we balance individual rights with the well-being of society at large.
It makes me think about all those times we just blindly click agree to terms and conditions online. Like, are we constantly making these little Posnerian bargains without even realizing it? Giving up bits of our privacy for the sake of convenience or, better online services.
That's a great point. And it really highlights how pervasive these trade-offs between privacy and convenience have become in the digital age. Like they're everywhere, but they're often hidden,
Yeah.
Not very transparent.
Right. And then the entry shifts gears a bit and talks about the communitarian perspective. And this seems to be like a different approach altogether, right? Compared to the individualistic focus of the liberal thinkers we talked about earlier.
Oh, absolutely. Communitarians, they put a lot of emphasis on the social value of privacy, like how privacy contributes to the well-being of the community, how it helps shape our norms and practices. They're not against individual privacy, not at all. But they're saying it's not just about individual rights, it's about fostering healthy communities.
So for them, privacy is less about me and more about us.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. They might say that, some limits on individual privacy are necessary for the good of the community. Like they might support limited surveillance in public spaces to help reduce crime, for example, or just make public spaces safer.
I can see that perspective.
Hmm.
But it also makes me wonder where they draw the line. How much individual privacy are we willing to sacrifice for the sake of the community? And who gets to make that decision?
Yeah, those are the million-dollar questions, right? It's definitely a balancing act, figuring out where that line should be.
And of course, we can't talk about critiques of privacy without bringing in the feminist perspective. The entry mentions it, but it feels like a whole other deep dive on its own.
Totally. The feminist critique is so important because it really exposes how these traditional ideas about privacy, especially that public-private divide we've been talking about, have actually been used to justify gender inequality. Like, they've helped maintain these patriarchal power structures that, well, haven't exactly been fair to women.
Historically, women were often relegated to the private sphere, right? Excluded from public life and denied opportunities that were available to men. So the feminist critique makes us see how privacy can be this double-edged sword. It can be a shield, but it can also be a weapon, depending on who's using it.
Exactly. They point out that privacy has often been used to protect men's power and control, while at the same time denying women autonomy over their own bodies and lives. Like, think about issues like reproductive rights or domestic violence or even online harassment. These are all areas where women's privacy is routinely violated.
So it's not enough to simply say that everyone has a right to privacy. We need to look at how that right is actually distributed in society, who benefits from its protection, and who ends up being harmed.
Precisely. And that brings us to Anita Allen, who offers a really interesting take on the feminist critique. She acknowledges that privacy can be misused, like it can be used to shield abuse and inequality, to hide things that shouldn't be hidden. But she's also cautioning against completely rejecting privacy as a concept.
So it's like she's saying, okay, privacy can be problematic, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's still essential for protecting individuals and groups who are vulnerable.
Right. Allen argues that, yeah, we need to be critical of how privacy has been used to maintain these power imbalances,
Mhm.
but we also need to recognize its value in promoting autonomy, dignity, freedom from oppression, and that's a really hard balance to strike.
It seems like every perspective we look at just adds another layer of complexity to this idea of privacy. And it's not just theoretical, right? It's about real-world issues like how technology is changing our relationship with privacy, how surveillance is becoming more and more pervasive, and how we navigate all of this in our everyday lives.
And speaking of navigating the digital age, that's where we're headed next. We'll be tackling how the internet, data collection, the constant presence of technology, all of that is reshaping our understanding of privacy and bringing up new philosophical questions that, well, we haven't had to face before.
Can't wait to dive in. Okay, so we're back. And honestly, my head is spinning a little bit. We've covered so much ground already, from ancient Greece to feminist critiques, and it's clear that privacy is, well, it's complicated.
Yeah, no kidding. It's not just about keeping secrets or hiding things. It's about autonomy. It's about justice. It's about the very fabric of our social lives. But how do we even begin to apply these ideas, these concepts, in a world where, like, our data is constantly being collected, analyzed, and, basically turned into a commodity?
Right, like in parts 1 and 2, we established that privacy is this multifaceted thing, this really important thing. But with technology moving so fast, how do we even keep up? How do we make sure those values, those principles we talked about, how do we make sure they don't just get lost in the digital noise?
It's tough, no doubt. But the Stanford Encyclopedia entry does give us some frameworks, some tools to think about these challenges. And one that I think is particularly helpful is Helen Nissenbaum's concept of contextual integrity.
Contextual integrity. Okay. Can you unpack that a little bit? I mean, it sounds pretty academic.
It's actually a pretty straightforward idea. Nissenbaum's argument is that what makes something a privacy violation, well, it depends on the context. Like, sharing your medical information with your doctor, that's normal, expected, right? But sharing that same information with your employer, totally different story. Privacy isn't about absolute secrecy, it's about information flowing appropriately within different social contexts.
So it's not just about what information is revealed, it's about who it's revealed to and why and under what circumstances. The context is key.
Exactly. And this becomes super important when we think about the online world. Like, posting a photo on social media, that's one thing. But having that same photo end up in some facial recognition database used by law enforcement, completely different context, completely different implications for privacy.
Right, huge difference. But with data being shared and collected all the time, often without our knowledge, how do we even begin to define these appropriate contexts for privacy online? It feels like we're constantly clicking agree to these terms of service agreements that we don't even read, just giving away our data without a second thought.
Yeah, and that's the scary part. The digital landscape makes it really, really hard to maintain control over our own information. It's like this constant battle, and we're often not even aware that we're fighting it. But I think that's why these control-based approaches to privacy are so important, now more than ever.
Right. Those approaches we talked about earlier,
Yeah.
remind me, what's the main idea there?
So thinkers like Weston, Freid, and Scanlon, they argue that privacy is fundamentally about control. Control over information, control over decision-making. It's not just about keeping things hidden. It's about having the agency to decide who has access to what information about you and how it's used.
So in a way, it's about taking back some of that power we've given away to these tech companies, to these algorithms that seem to know more about us than we know about ourselves.
Exactly. It means demanding more transparency from companies about their data practices. It means pushing for stronger privacy regulations that give individuals real control over their digital footprint.
And it connects back to that idea of data colonialism, right, that we touched on earlier. It's not just about individual privacy. It's about how data is being used to reinforce existing power dynamics, often in ways that are, deeply unfair and unjust.
Absolutely. Data colonialism highlights the systemic issues at play here, how our data is being extracted and exploited to, well, to control and manipulate entire populations. And that brings in issues of social justice, of equity, making privacy not just a personal concern, but a collective one.
So protecting privacy in the digital age, it's not just about safeguarding our own little bubble. It's about creating a more just and equitable society for everyone.
And it requires us to be more than just passive consumers of technology. We need to be active citizens, demanding more accountability from those in power, whether it's governments or corporations or, anyone who's collecting and using our data.
Wow, this whole conversation has been a real eye-opener. Privacy is way more than just a right to be left alone. It's about our values, our relationships, our freedom, the kind of society we want to live in.
It's about our humanity, really. And as technology keeps advancing, the philosophical questions around privacy will only become more urgent, more complex, more crucial to grapple with.
Absolutely. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground, but hopefully you've come away with a deeper understanding of what's at stake when we talk about privacy, and maybe even some tools to navigate these challenges in your own lives.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you all. Keep those philosophical muscles flexed.
And to keep questioning, keep pushing for a future where privacy is valued and protected. Thanks for listening.